We are called as Christians to turn the other cheek, to forgive 70 times 7, to be gracious and loving and kind, and to just go the extra mile. But we are not called to just sit there and stay in a marriage of abuse.
What's up, truth seekers? This is another biblical first responder video. I am Pastor Jacob. This is Witness Wednesday, people. This is what we do every Wednesday right about this time. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a big question because the Bible does not address this outright. If a spouse is being physically abused, do they have a right to divorce? And if they divorce, do they have the right to remarry? Or are they still in bondage and cannot remarry? That is the question on today. And I got this clip from Mike Winger because I think, to me personally, I stand behind this 100%. He is right on this. And so let's look at this real quick and see what Mike Winger says about women who are, or a spouse, let's just say a spouse, who is abused in a marriage.
We are called as Christians to turn the other cheek, to forgive 70 times 7, to be gracious and loving and kind, and to just go the extra mile. But we are not called to just sit there and stay in a marriage of abuse.
Does she get to leave the marriage, but she has to stay by herself and can't remarry? Or can she divorce and remarry because of the type of situation she's in? Well, the Bible doesn't particularly speak it out. So then this is left up to, in my opinion, Christian liberty, because the Bible doesn't speak on it. But would any person in their right mind tell a woman who's being beaten, who's being tortured and beat up on, that she has to stay in that marriage? What kind of love is that? That beats up on you and treats you like crap. That's not love. So then should a woman have to be stuck in that marriage? My answer to that is absolutely not.
My 13th principle, and I'm going to tell you the principle first this time, and then I'll give you biblical reasons for it. Radical danger or harm justifies separation and divorce. Radical danger or harm. It justifies not only separation, but also divorce. Now, I'm going to give you a number of examples in the scripture and then show you how to apply that to divorce. Examples where any kind of radical harm or danger, it justifies, generally speaking, breaking rules. So I know that sounds, this is potentially abused, what I'm about to tell you, but I think it's very true.
Nor does the Bible even suggest that a woman has to stay in a marriage and get beat up on and get abused. Yet, and I understand this as well, because the Bible doesn't outright speak on it, do we just send the woman back to the husband and say, hey, just deal with it? Pray to God that he'll stop. When? When he kills her? Or when she kills him? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No way.
Jesus, we know the rule of the Old Testament. Like you maybe you know this, right? You don't eat the showbread. The showbread is for the temple and it's for the priests. Only they can eat it. But in Matthew 12:3, Jesus says something where there was an exception to that rule. And he says, have you not read what David did when he was hungry and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and he ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. So the principle seems to be, well, David's life is in danger. He's being chased by Saul. He needs food to continue on his journey and save his own life. And Jesus seems to be approving of his eating of the showbread, but there's a law against it because this is an exception to that law.
When he talked about David with the showbread, David and his people had no right, legally under the law, they had no right to touch that showbread. They had no right. It was only for the Levites. They had no right to touch it. But because of the circumstances, they would have died if they didn't get nothing to eat. God didn't hold them guilty for it.
There's a lot of other examples of these types of things. Matthew 12, verses 5 through 7. We'll just scroll down a bit. Jesus talks about this and the Sabbath. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath, the priests of the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless, right? Because they're laboring in the temple on the Sabbath. This is interesting, isn't it? Wait, they profane, but they're guiltless? And then he goes on to explain the principle they didn't understand. He says, I tell you something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. When a woman or husband, it's not as often common, but it does happen. When a woman leaves or flees, or a guy, because of abuse of themselves or of the children, and they have to get out of Dodge, to tell them that they are required to stay faithful to that marriage and to not divorce and to stick with that person, I think it condemns the guiltless. And I think that it's violating the God desires mercy and not sacrifice principle.
So then the answer cannot be tell her go back, tell her to stay there. That's not the answer. That is the absolute wrong answer. Now, with that said, do we have any biblical evidence that God would say otherwise? Because he didn't speak on it outright in the word. So then, does the Bible give us any options to get out of this thing? Where not only does the woman get away from abuse, but that she can have the opportunity to live a life being loved by someone who actually loves her or him. Let's look at this Mike Winger clip, and I'll be right back.
Let me give you another example here. Same chapter, Matthew 12, verses 11 and 12. Violating the Sabbath, so to speak, in at least their view of the Sabbath, their overly strict view of the Sabbath, just like some people's overly strict view of marriage. Matthew 12:11, it says, which one of you has a sheep? If it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will take hold of it and lift it out. And of course they would. They would all have done that. Then he goes on to say, of how much more value is the man than the sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Yeah, don't work on the Sabbath, but you can do good on the Sabbath. There's some great good deed that needs to be done. Well, it is good to encourage a woman to depart from a seriously abusive situation, or a man, or kids for that matter. That's a general good.
Okay, so like I said, to me, Mike Winger makes the perfect case by using these different scriptures to point out that God had made strict orders. He had gave strict orders on these certain scenarios. And because of the dire situations that these people were in these scenarios, God allowed them to break the rule. That there was an exception to the rule. And then also when you look at the one about the Sabbath day, that was a good one, because as soon as he said it, I'm like, yes. That makes sense. I already knew where he was going with it when he started it. Because I'm reading Luke right now. I'm slow rolling through Luke, and I just read that. So then when he said it, I'm like, yes, that's it. But when Jesus was talking about your animal falling into the ditch on the Sabbath day, are you going to leave him in there until the next day, or are you going to go get him out? You're going to go get him out. That is an exception to one of the 10 commandments. That is the moral law. That was an exception. Jesus was showing that, hey, the Sabbath was made for the man, not the man for the Sabbath. If that animal falls in that hole, you better go get him out. That's what God expects you to do. You wouldn't do no less. You wouldn't leave that animal in that pit. You're going to go get him out. So then, guess what? There's an exception to the rule.
The exception here is about human life and human health. And that's what the abuse issue is all about. Can someone depart a marriage when there's abuse like that going on? And again, finally, to get to where we are today, you're not to divorce except for adultery. I would say, unless essential health is at risk. After all, this is the commonality among so many examples of exceptions to the rule in the Bible and from the mouth of Jesus. It alone doesn't answer all the questions, but there's a principle that we can say, We can obey this principle with wisdom. When life is at stake, when serious health concerns are at stake, yes, you can get out of Dodge, you could flee, you could hide, you could do whatever you need to do. Jesus' instruction in the scripture is based on getting the heart of marriage. Therefore, we can evaluate his instruction as a principle about the heart of marriage, not an unbending law that doesn't allow for exceptions. And it's consistent with compassion. And perhaps that's what Paul meant when he says we're not enslaved. We're not talking about making marriage a slavery situation. It's not meant to be that. And so in such cases where marriage is becoming slavery, we are not enslaved.
And so in such cases where marriage is becoming slavery, we are not enslaved.